Hello, sparkly beans. If you're new here, hi, I'm Avery. I like to talk about my spiritual journey, personal growth, spiritual concepts, and I like to weave in tools like tarot and astrology. If you're not new, you may have noticed my intro has changed. I used to say hello YouTube, but I've realized you're not a platform, you're people. And you're also sparkly magical beings. So there you go. This video is going to be all about showing up, sharing, creating, and radiance, which is the theme of my life path number. If you've ever heard of life path numbers, mine is 1, and I was very uncomfortable with that. So we're going to talk about all those topics. It's going to be a journey, y'all. I'm going to tell a fairly long story. So I'm going to give you a kind of TLDR on this, and also I will have timestamps, and there'll be a kind of a summary of like 10 things I've learned at the end. So you're welcome to skip to that, but I would ask you to listen to this quick little TLDR before you skip over. I think particularly this video will be helpful to those who are a creator and are just interested in other creators' experience. To those who have anxiety about how you show up, and folks who are in kind of comparison fields. I do want to give a content warning that after the TLDR, the story will include some stuff that's specific about my experience as a white person that's kind of stumbling through anti-racism and what it means to show up. So if you are BIPOC and you don't really want to hear about that process, absolutely no hard feelings if you don't watch, although you're welcome to. I won't talk about any like super specific potentially triggering things necessarily, but I will talk a little bit about the process and kind of how I internally have changed my approach over time. So the TLDR is basically this. One, there's going to be more personal content on this channel. I'm going to tell stories. I'm going to talk about my experience, especially about my spiritual journey. I'm also going to be doing more long form writing, specifically on my newsletter. So I will leave a link below to sign up for that newsletter. And that is really the hub of where I'm going to be putting my writing energy and a lot of my storytelling energy. I think it's going to be an amazing place. I'm really excited about it. There will be options when you sign up. You can opt out of specific groups. So if you're just interested in tarot and astrology content, or if you're not interested in that and you're just interested in like general spiritual experience, growth, that kind of thing, recommendations from around the web, you can opt in and out of those lists to make that a little bit easier for you. But specifically, I'm going to stop trying to do long form writing and Instagram captions because it doesn't work. So I will continue to be on Instagram at Queer Magical, but I'll do more things like journal prompts or single card pulls or just little like quick advice things, rather than trying to write an essay in the Instagram caption. That just doesn't work. The other thing about signing up for my newsletter and why I recommend it is that it will be the quickest place to get announcements. So, I don't have a big enough channel to have like a community tab on YouTube. So anything that's coming out, anything that's new, you may only hear about it in the newsletter, or you will hear about it quicker in the newsletter. So recommend you sign up. If you do want to support, I'm also changing my model of how I do support. So I wanted to align with my values, which are not very capitalist, not at all capitalist, and really about accessibility of content and getting content out to people. So I realized that in order to be sustainable, align with my energy, and get the best content out there for y'all, the best way to do that was to change my model. So again, I'm going to be using the newsletter, probably, I'll be writing weekly, but you can again opt in and opt out to get less frequently. Roughly weekly. I'm not going to hold myself to a super strict schedule, but that's what I intend. And I'm not going to be providing Patreon exclusive perks anymore because I realized that just wasn't working as a model for me. Instead, in the spirit of the gift, which I've talked about a lot on my Instagram, if you've read Sacred Economics, you may be familiar with that. But the basic idea is that I offer my content, most of what I do, as a gift. I like doing that. I feel good about doing that. I feel joyful about doing that. And if you receive value from it, or if you see and recognize how others are receiving value from it that can't afford to support, then I invite you to go over to patreon.com/queermagical go ahead and sign up. There will be multiple tiers to choose from. You can contribute as little as $1 a month. There will generally not be separate perks, but you can consider that your return gift for what I'm putting out there for free. And then I will have a $20 sort of sustaining tier to represent like a more sustainable contribution. Since this is my job, I don't have a traditional job anymore. Like this is where I am supporting myself and meeting my needs. So if you are able to contribute at that level, there will be a little extra perk. You'll get a kind of quarterly video from me that is exclusive, and you'll have some opportunities to kind of engage or give feedback on what I do. But generally speaking, content's going to be out there for free. And I just encourage you that if you're able and would like to contribute and you receive value, to consider doing so, because that is what supports and keeps this content out there. Okay, so yeah, I think in general, I would just wrap that up by saying that I really want to put my values into action. And I'm going to be talking all through this video about putting values into action, but one of those is trusting that opportunities will come through, trusting that if I put stuff out there that's authentic and that's valuable, that the right people will find it and the right people will help, and not relying so much on planning. Those are things that I really care about and that I have been afraid to really fully put into action. So that's what I'm doing right now. I also want to note that sharing is super, super valuable to me. So if you're watching this and you value my content or you see my content elsewhere, please, 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 if you know of a friend, somebody online that just might benefit from this, you can mention them down below in YouTube. You can hit the share button, send this video or another one to a friend. You can share my socials, again, Queer Magical on both Instagram and Twitter. Though Instagram is more where I'm posting content. Twitter is a little more like asking questions and engaging with other people in the community. You can forward the newsletter if you sign up, or just send the link. That would mean so much to me, because one of the challenges I found, especially with social media, is just you're dependent on the technology to get the word out there. And I know that the content I'm creating is something that people resonate with. It's hard to find the people. So it would actually mean quite a lot to me if you did just mention my name, drop a share link to friends who might benefit from it, so that we can get the word out there. You know, my sort of like wildest, most exciting dream is to be able to bring in enough people that, one, lots of people can't afford to pay for it and are getting free content, and that's awesome. And that two, a bunch of people making small contributions will be able to sustain the bulk of my work. You know, my really wildest dream is that maybe one day I'll be able to offer signature programs and like high value offers totally for free. Right now I'm not doing that because I do need some source of income, but I love the idea of it. And so if you love that idea too, I would love the support either by sharing or by signing up with the Patreon, but also please have a light heart and know that if you're not able or to contribute or aren't receiving value, or if you want to put that return gift somewhere else. If you're receiving value from this, you know, your gift does not have to be monetary to me or share to me. It could be letting me know. It could be finding something else to support that's in line with what you read, so or watched. So that's a TLDR, pretty much. I mentioned the content warning. I will have timestamps below. And so let's get started. Let's tell the story. Okay, so we're going to start, well, we'll just start from the foundation that I am a people pleaser. I know that now. I'm a recovering people pleaser. You might also be a recovering people pleaser. Apparently there's a lot of us. Someone made the joke the other day that was like, I don't know what people are going to do because 2022, all the people pleasers are going to be done. And I think that's really true. I think a lot of people are realizing that we're done. And I think some of that people pleasing is grounded in the fact that I grew up in the South. I was raised, I'm non-binary, pronouns Z in here if you're curious. But I was raised with people presuming that I was a woman. And so I was raised into sort of female Southern culture, which is it has some specific stuff around people pleasing, and around sacrifice. which, by the way, is a word I've come to love. Maybe I'll do a video about it and its actual etymology, but the typical meaning of sacrifice. And I learned to kind of downplay and be soft about things. Now, I've always been a talker. I've always been, out there, as it were. But nonetheless, there was some of that happening. So I'm going to start my story around, I think it was 2010. A couple of things were happening. So one, I had been sort of learning about and starting to process anti-racism in a more serious way, starting around 2007, 2008. While I was in law school, which I was attending for human rights, I was really at that point in my mid-20s starting to better understand beyond the surface level of anti-racism, starting to understand why other struggles and liberation were tied up with my own. And reading a lot more written by BIPOC, written by people of color, written by Black folks, written by Indigenous folks, especially written by femmes, women, queer, and trans folks who also intersected with those identities, and starting to sort of build a body of understanding, and then also a felt understanding through my relationships, through being in community and in relationship with people who are non-white, racialized people, BIPOC, different people like different terms, but so that was all happening, and that was starting to grow and build. And my orientation at the time was towards sort of learning these new things, as I'm sure a lot of white people do, like understand the depth of the problem and the depth of our complicity. The ding just went off. You may hear a ding occasionally, and we're just going to call it a sign from the universe because I can't figure out how to turn my little mindfulness bell off. So just go with that. Anyway, I, was starting to understand that it's not, that racism is not just, a thing we mention and then throw it aside. How every system is rolled up in racism and in colonialism. So I was starting to understand this, and like I said, my orientation towards this was, I think, rooted in my own experience of queerness and being a queer from the South. And the way personal relationships, I could see personal relationships changing minds. And I could also see the way people used as an excuse for their anti-queerness the idea that they didn't know anybody gay, which they could say because most of us who were queer were fucking terrified, because it was more of a risk in the 90s when I was growing up, in the early 2000s. It was more of a risk. For context, I graduated high school in 2003. But more of a risk to be open about your identity. And therefore, people could claim they didn't know any gay people. And that had a profound effect on me because it made me realize that talking about things, showing up, being somebody that someone already trusts and knows, and then sharing your identity could be profound. And also a step removed, but because of the pain and the difficulty of being present and sharing your own experience, I also saw how folks who at the time, this term is kind of outmoded, but would consider themselves allies, would speak up for us, for queers. And there was a similar effect, maybe not as strong, but when allies said, I understand the pain and the difficulty of a queer person in relationship with somebody coming out and sharing their story, and I also see the power of that relational connection, I'm going to stand up as an ally, and I'm going to use my relationship with people to talk about that experience and talk about why they might want to consider changing their point of view. And so that was also my take on racism. My take on racism at first was, okay, cool. I'm in a lot of queer communities and trans communities, and I see racism happening. And I can speak to my white peers and say, hey, there's a problem, right? And I can listen deeply and I can learn. And then I can transmit that knowledge. I can share recommendations. I can share quotes. I can, share how my own journey is going, right? Hopefully my throat will hold out for this. Another layer is that I think I had always tried to follow the metrics of external success. Thing a lot of us do. It has roots in white supremacy culture, capitalist culture. But success, outcomes, metrics, what other people tell you to achieve. I would go a little outside of that, but I might adhere to the standards of a slightly different community, but I was still adhering to standards. So when I went through school and then I got out of school and then it was 2009 and there were no jobs, it was definitely a blow to the ego. It was like, oh my God, I've tried really hard. I've done all the things. I've tried to achieve academically. And nobody's just going to hand me a job. Now, of course, this comes from a position of comfort. Like the expectation that anyone would hand me a job comes from a position of privilege. But there was that. And then there was the not being acculturated, mainly for gender reasons, into asking for what you need. Self-sacrifice, denial, all these kind of Puritan values, and then also like Southern values, I think, come in here. In 2010, I went to a media training, and one of the things I learned at that media training, which was geared towards women, I think I was the only non-binary person, but I told them that and they were fine. And it was for progressive people, But it was a media training, and what they really were teaching us was to claim our expertise. And they were teaching us kind of the fake it till you make it, or the, you don't get it unless you ask. And men are always going to ask, and men are acculturated to ask, and we're not. So they're teaching you these skills, and so I learned how to, and I felt a little bit of a discomfort with this. I mean, remember thinking, okay, but like, I can claim expertise in these ways, but like, I'm not any better than anybody else. But their take was very much like, the system is set up this way, so here's how you play into the system. And thus, I left that training, and I think at that point I maybe only had one public speaking opportunity, but I started to ask more. I started to show up and say, hey, can I speak at your college? Can I pitch to your blog? So I was writing, I was speaking. That was a big part of my life. I think at that point, the dream was to really be able to kind of sell myself and hustle, and maybe I could be a freelance writer full-time, maybe I met people in that training who were doing that, maybe I could be sort of a full-time feminist, full-time queer feminist, and that could be my angle. And I probably could have if I really leaned into that. Unfortunately, I also had a 6-hour commute and a job taking up 10 hours of my day that was paying me not a living wage, really. Barely a living wage. But over time I probably could have done that. So that was what I was learning how to do. And so for a while, I also, by the way, was living in Baltimore for a while, and then later in the DC area, which is a culture that is very about achievement and very like, what do you do is always the first question in DC. So it was a very capitalist alignment, even though I would have said at the time that I was socialist. Now I'd probably go a little more towards anarchist, but it was kind of a like, well, this is a system, so this is what you kind of have to do. Okay, so that worked for a while. I did a lot of speaking, I did a lot of writing. I got some degree of like Twitter fame when Twitter was new. I ran this thing called Trans Chat. It was a hashtag chat for about a year. And I was hanging out with people who were really cool, and some of them were kind of like growing in fame. It was also a period where trans was becoming like the thing that people were talking about. And so there's a lot of opportunities there. There's a lot of focus there. But over time I got more and more uncomfortable because I was continuing to learn through my experiences. I was continuing to make mistakes and understand those mistakes. I was continuing to listen and learn and understand my role in a racist culture and what could I do for change. I was also moving up in my career, so I was moving out of the point where it was kind of like I make so little money and have so little time that I feel like I'm justified in, like, I'm not going to show up at the protest because I'm literally on the train, like I'm not, going to be able to donate because I can barely afford food, like that those sort of excuses, or that, not they were bad excuses necessarily, but like that attitude didn't make sense as I moved up and had more free time and a little more free time and more money. And I would give more to Black organizations, give more to Native organizations. But as this is happening, I'm getting more and more uncomfortable with my role in public. Because I'm hearing people talk about things like, don't, like, the problem of all the white speakers, and the problem of the panels that are all white, and the problems of, the blogosphere being all white. Remember blogosphere, by the way? Nobody uses that anymore, but blogosphere, it was a thing. And I also was hearing more and more about the importance of risk, and the importance, especially for white people in anti-racist work, of risk, of giving till it hurts, of showing up when you're at risk of violence. So all these things about risk. And I kept thinking, damn it, like, I'm doing some stuff, I'm talking a lot about race. One of the things I would do, incidentally, was like when I would give talks or do classes around like sexuality, gender, polyamory, whatever it was, I would always sneak in a fair bit of content about racism. I would always kind of like, a lot of times those audiences were largely white, not always, but a lot of times. And it would kind of be like, you didn't show up for this, but we're going to put it in there because it's important. Doing things like land acknowledgements, etc., right? Just to like open people's minds up a little bit. But as the trans movement was growing, I was also seeing that like it wasn't anymore the case where like I could be brave and use my privilege to stand up because, well, no. It was still true that I could be brave and use my privilege to stand up, and that Black, Indigenous, Latina, etc. folks who did that would risk a lot more violence. That was still true. But there was more, as there was more awareness and then a little more acceptance, it was much easier for people to find speakers. It wasn't like if I didn't show up, there would be nobody there. And so as it became true, I felt less and less comfortable with my role. And I realized that the thing that felt risky to me, the thing that felt like I would be giving something up because I enjoyed teaching, I enjoyed speaking, and I enjoyed writing, would be to walk away. The thing I could do is say, you know what? I don't want to be a white person on a stage. I don't want to be a white person with a platform. I don't want my shit to go viral. Not that it really did, but like, I don't want to show up. At the time, I believed that the best way for me to operate was to keep myself small, tucked away, still doing the learning, still doing the research, still doing the work in like my personal relationships, but not to be public. Give money, but like, don't put yourself out there so much, and allow racialized people to fill the vacuum. Looking back, I can see some of the problems with that, and even at the time I was like, well, like, this is what I want to do, but like, is this actually going to happen? But that was how I approached it. And this was around, I want to say like 2016, 2017, around the same time, I was discovering tarot and astrology. I started this channel. I went real deep and intense into it. Like, people are always surprised that I haven't been studying it for 20 years. I'm like, no, I just did nothing but study it for 5. Got really into my personal work, my spiritual journey. And then, you know, I was like, well, I have a YouTube channel. Is that in alignment? And what I sort of based feeling okay about that on was a couple things. One was that sort of similar to the way I had justified the kind of working within the system, which brings up a lot, but similar to how I had justified that by saying, well, like, somebody needs to be in these rooms that marginalized people can't access and talking about it. I felt a little that way in the spiritual community. I could see in a lot of ways in which the general talk about spirituality was very rooted in racism, capitalism, colonialism, appropriation. I could see the way that, like, as a general community, not talking about anybody specific, but like, I mean, there were some specific people, but like also as a general community, that the general sort of knowledge, language, understanding of intersectionality, of racism and colonialism, of all these things, was much lower than the kind of activist circles I had mostly ran in. And so, one, it felt like me being present, just even though I was white, that me being present and like bringing up these things sometimes on my channel was helpful. The other thing was, I very much framed it as, you're not an expert anymore. So if you go back to that, you know, I learned how to be an expert, and I did it, and I pitched myself that way. It was like, we're going to pull that back. We're going to roll that back. I'm going to say, I'm new to this. I'm showing up. I'm loving this, but I'm learning, right? So my channel was going to be all about learning and being with me and my experience and sharing. And I think that really worked, right? My channel, you know, hi to those of you who've been around a while, but, you know, I think I probably spent a year, maybe even 2 full years, where most videos got 5 to 10 views. And consistently, the funny thing was I was consistently publishing twice a week, which I never managed to do in my like more hyped sort of public self as an activist. But I was actually like, because I loved it, because it was so in it, right, that it was very, not easy, but like I could do twice a week, talking about this stuff, talking about tarot, talking about astrology, talking about spiritual stuff, talking about myself, right, like doing VRs. And so it kept me going without any real, like, you know, with a comment here and there, but like, you know, most of my videos, nobody was watching. And then I got to the point where I am now, which is about 200 something subscribers. And yeah, I love that. I love that y'all are here. If you're not already subscribed, do the thing. But over time, well, we'll get there. Anyway, so I was doing that. Okay, so fast forward again, June 2020. A lot of white people suddenly noticed how bad things are. And I felt like I'd seen this cycle several times with things in the news, especially police brutality things in the news, and maybe to some extent with the DAPL pipeline. But it seemed like even more. Like June 2020 was a particular point where a lot of people were like, oh shit. And what was interesting there, so like in the period between when I left doing the activism, we'll call it the activism speaking, the queer related speaking, point between there and, well, I guess I should disclaim that I didn't totally 100% step back. The other thing I was still doing was talks at tech events about trans inclusive data mostly. That I felt like was an exception because those events were so closed to people who themselves and their employers didn't have the money to get them there, that like no one was going to be talking about that. So again, it was kind of that same thing where it was like, nobody's talking about this. It's more beneficial to be in the room. But in that like 3 or 4 years, I felt more in integrity after making that change. And then by feeling it more in integrity, I think I also got like a lot blunter in my delivery. There's a lot of like calling out, sometimes calling in, being really explicit, especially at work, in the workplace. Like just being like, this shit's racist. What are we doing? And being more comfortable, like just, you know, looking somebody in the eye and being like, you're white, you're racist, I'm racist, we're all racist. It's part of the definition of white, right? And it was very like, and the other thing is that when I would get into conversations, I felt like it was so important because this was so bad. And because I would hear Black rage, I would hear Native rage coming from a place of deep hurt and pain and trauma and personal experience. I would hear that and I would think, yes, that's the approach, right? And I want to be very clear that for people who are not white, like, yes, like, you know, any reaction to this bullshit is 100% the right one. And sometimes it makes sense for white people to do that as well. Like, there were definitely people at work who would be like, oh my God, thank you for like bringing that up, because people weren't listening and like making it that clear was important. But also, I think I was developing a little bit of a kind of like righteous attitude. And righteous in a weird way, because I would be that blunt, but there was a lot of self-hatred. There was a lot of self-judgment. I was projecting now, I realize, all over the place. I was taking the fear, the discomfort, and like the fear specifically, what if I'm bad? What if I'm, you know, I would say really, like, especially talking generally, I would be like, white people are evil. We are evil. Like, I know sometimes people do that and they're like, except me. I didn't do the except me. I was like, no, I'm evil too. I was like, we're, like, as a race, we shouldn't exist. We should, you know, if I was getting really extreme, right? There is no future with white people that could be good because we are poison, right? That is a really extremist view that is also rooted in white supremacy culture, right? Like, I just turned it on, like, on ourselves, but it was a very extreme view and nobody was asking for it. Nobody was saying, erase yourself, Avery, efface yourself, go away, disappear. Nobody said that. They just said, stop shitting all over my sandwich. You know? Reduce harm. Get out the way. Make reparations. Land back, right? Like, those are the things people are asking for. And I sort of realized these like capitalist white supremacy extremes, and punishment dynamics and the prison industrial complex, all these things were coming into my interpersonal relationships. And there was a righteousness, but the righteousness was coming out of fear. The righteousness was like, I have to do all the, I can't no compromise. If you compromise, then you're complicit and you're terrible. And I think subconsciously and even a little bit consciously, I was also terrified that I was a bad person. I was judging myself. I was angry at myself. If I made a mistake, I knew that I had to be present with it and acknowledge it. And I think I was doing what I would still do now in terms of like reaction, like apologize, don't ask others to educate you, acknowledge the harm, offer reparations, but also like that could include never talk to me again, like, being really like, I'll go do my own learning, like doing all of the quote unquote right things. But internally, applying that punishment dynamic to myself. So June 2020 happens. I again feel like I'm not doing enough. I need to be taking more risk. I start worrying about this platform. I start feeling like, oh shit, I'm hearing all these people talk about how white people take too much space, white people's racism or anti-racism is performative. I've heard these things before, but like I'm hearing them. And so I'm like, okay, I'm going to take a break. I need to think about, and if you're curious about this journey, you can go back there. I'm leaving the videos up, but I was like, okay, I need a break to process. I need to like not speak. I need to be silent. I think silence is really important right now. But, and it's actually interesting, you know, there's that phrase about complicity, like white silence is violence. So it's sort of funny that, like, it's all about being silent. But I think because I had so much perfectionism, again, white cultural value, capitalist value, perfectionism, that the idea of showing up and speaking and doing the work was coming through, but then also this feeling of like, I can't do it without causing more harm. So that was the thing. And some of you may remember I kind of came back and was like, okay, I'm going to do this channel, but like, I'm not going to talk about myself. I'm going to take, like, not take myself out of it, like, wanted to keep a voice, but I was like, I'm only going to share things that, like, I've thought through, that are fully baked, like, topics I feel super confident on. Not going to share the processing. It's kind of funny how I came away from my initial intention with this channel, but, like, I'm not going to share the experience. I'm not going to do VRs. I'm not doing anything that's about me. Nobody wants to hear about me. That's narcissistic. That's arrogant. That's selfish. We're going to write it all down in a journal. If we have a thought and we just need to share a thought, we're not going to fucking vent it on YouTube. This is me thinking to myself. You know, we're going to write it down in the journal. We're going to do it privately. We're going to process everything privately. We do not, there's too much risk of harm or just self-centering. Get the fuck off, right? Get back, step back. That was the approach. And I was doing a lot of work through that period. So from June 2020 to around the time when and beyond, the time I decided to leave my job and start a business, and do this whole spiritual thing full time. One, I did a lot of work and a lot of processing and realization around the projection. So, like, being able to identify it and realize that the projection wasn't helpful. Doing healing work. Some of this is what got me to the point where I even could share, you know, educational content. And I started to sort of find my internal compass. And I think that's one of the big things that was helpful and that I think I actually want to do work on with other folks, is around finding an internal compass. Because one thing about white culture is that we grow up learning. So if we go back to, like, the achievement focus and the way I felt in school, we go back to someone's going to give you dictates of how to live. Somebody's going to, you know, you're going to agree with something. And then once you agree with something, that is the path you follow. And that is how you know what is right. Is you listen to people and you do what's right. The problem, or one of the problems in that, is that we're not really being taught. We're being taught to have opinions, but we're not exactly being taught to have values. We're not developing our own internal compass and our ability to, in our own hearts and without any other interaction, make choices about what is within our values. I could name my values. I could talk at length about my values, but, like, when it comes down to the nitty-gritty of, like, two opposing opinions, and this comes into anti-racist work and into racism, because not all BIPOC have the same opinion. Racialized people are not a monolith. And so if we hear, let's say, for sake of argument, let's say it's two black folks having an opinion about why white folks should show up. We hear black person A saying, keep doing what you're doing, oh my God, it's great, thank you for standing up, being there for me. We hear black person 2 saying, I hate the way you're showing up, it's bullshit, it's racist, and fuck off, right? Which is totally within their rights to do. And then we're like, oh shit, who do I go with? And we might go with person A or go with person B for a while, and then meander around because we hear different things. We don't know how to, we don't learn, I don't think, how to take in many differing opinions and let them inform our own values, but also, like, using our internal compass around our values to say, okay, I'm going to listen deeply. I'm going to pull in all the information. I want to understand and be with you and hear what you're saying from both of these hypothetical people, right? I want to take in your joy, your pain, your rage, whatever your emotions are. I want to like hear that. I want to hear the things you're telling me about your experience. But then when it's all said and done, I think you have to be able to take that and be like, okay, based on what I know, based on my values, here's how I'm going to act next. Next step. Not how I'm going to act in 10 years. We don't have to plan that. Next step. And knowing that it's going to be uncomfortable. And knowing that some people are going to disagree. And we keep listening. And maybe at some point, we're like, oh, I thought this was in my values, and I was wrong. So I'm going to make reparations, acknowledge, do my own learning, and then maybe I pivot a little bit. And maybe at some point, my compass changes a little bit. Maybe my values shift a little bit at some point. But generally speaking, I don't think we learn that, especially white people. I don't think we learn that. Maybe anybody schooled in this country, like from school, doesn't learn that. Like imagine if school was like, here's how to heal yourself, and here's how to like determine your values. Not a thing. You know what school does do? School gives you values. Like I remember school being like, you got little like reward thingies in elementary school. And I remember I got one for integrity, which was pretty funny with all this conversation. And then I got a like failing for responsibility, which was a very like, because of my ADHD. But I heard those values and I was told like you have to hit a mark on each value, you know? Okay, so I got this internal compass idea and I was doing a lot of work. I was also doing a lot of work and recognition and realizing how important the ability to stay in discomfort is, and how much when you have privilege, you think comfort is the goal. Comfort is the value. Comfort is the thing. And how much life isn't actually like that. Nature isn't like that. And the dissonance and the frustration that people must feel who, from a very early age, never got to experience the level of comfort that we did as people with privilege. Yeah, I feel anger as a queer person, as a trans person, when I see the way privilege in those areas means that people get to be comfortable in ways that I don't. When I hear about people, you know, having their cute little 12-year-old boyfriend or girlfriend, I'm like, well, meh. Right, I couldn't do that. I had a girlfriend in high school and, you know, random strangers yelled at us and threatened violence, like, which was a very small percentage of what people of color, and especially trans and queer people of color, go through. So discomfort was a part of how I came back to realizing that sharing and being vulnerable and being authentic was actually my path and important. And I mentioned at the beginning of this that my life path number is 1, and I hated that because the 1 path is all about radiance, showing up, sharing. I was like, But I started to heal from this self-effacing nature and realize that was part of my path. And so I decided to quit my job, decided to make this my business. I got a little more comfortable with sharing in some ways. And also, one more layer, we're getting towards the end of the story here, but one more layer is that even though I got better about the internal compass, I still had this idea, back to capitalism and white supremacy culture, of virtue. So I still had this idea that virtue was important. Maybe now I was starting to understand that like what virtue looks like could be self-determined, that it could be according to my own values. But there's still this idea of like, you're trying to be as good as possible. Very deeply rooted, people-pleasing, Southern culture, all of that. You have to be good. Christian. No, I wasn't raised Christian, but it was all around me. And this, by the way, is no shade to Christianity in general, because I think there are a lot of Christians who don't think that way, but there's a specific strain of Christianity that does. Virtue was still what I was striving for, to be the best I could be, best possible person. Maybe in a woo-woo hippie spiritual sense of like being the best at discomfort or something, but like still there. And I was doing things like I was putting these like hidden boundaries on myself. Like, I believed that I could quit my job and I could in the next few years, be able to establish a business that would make my bare minimum needs. But I also believe that it was bare, like, that I would never make more than that. I shouldn't expect to make more than that. I'm sort of putting limits on my income. Like, to be in integrity, you need to be not poor, but you need to be, baseline, right? I don't believe that anymore. I think I've realized that, in part through this program I'm in, but I've realized that the limits I was putting on money were kind of arbitrary. And then there's other limits I might want to put on money, but I'll get to that in a second, I think. So I was putting boundaries there. I was also really avoiding showing up in my full self, which is funny because, like, I've been vulnerable for a really long time, but then I was like, oh, that was all performative. That wasn't, So I was still like, I'm not going to talk about too much personal. I need to make this about you. So once it became a business, it was like, okay, it's got to be about you. It's got to be about the potential client. It's got to be about, this is what marketing advice says. Talk to you, not about me. And there was a lot of feelings of too muchness. I think we've talked so far about a lot of feelings of like not enoughness and not good enough, but I think not enough and too much can be frenzies. Around my multiple neurodivergencies, realizing the way people that I thought understood me and got me didn't. And then feeling like, oh, I always talk too much. I'm too loud. I'm too. And everything came back up again after I quit, having disappointment with my mental health, with my disability, with my fatigue, feeling like I wanted it all to be solved or done. But the big pivot, the big turning point, I've been writing a lot on Instagram. Again, you can just go to Queer Magical on Instagram and like scroll through the feed, and there's a bunch of, in the captions, you can see stuff from the book Sacred Economics, which was one place. Also working with some coaches. But through Sacred Economics especially, and nothing he's saying is new, right? This comes from a bunch of different places. But the way he framed it really helped me to and then the eclipses recently really helped me on a body level to kind of switch out of, it's not full, it's not immediate, but like I had a really significant switching out of this virtue thing. So I had been telling myself all these stories about the right way to have a business, or right way to market, platforms, selling, etc. I'd also been falling into more and more negativity, judgment, and criticism. But there was something about reading that book that helped me to realize that, like, oh, virtue is fake. I just wrote a post that I'll be putting on Instagram about virtue and like how it's almost like taking the red pill when you realize like, oh, virtue's not real. We made that up. We made that up as a system of control. We made that up as a way to separate ourselves from the earth and then exploit the earth. It's a lot of like Christian capitalism stuff. Like we separate out, Eisenstein talks about how if you separate out God and say that God is no longer earth-based, God is in the sky somewhere, then you no longer are tied to earth in the same way. And you can talk about virtue. And you can use virtue to control people, but then also exploit the land and not ask any questions about the virtue of that. So it was like taking the red pill and realizing virtue's fake. Have you ever heard of a good tree? No, you've not. You've not. Because it's a tree, right? We don't value things innate. We don't say that's a good squirrel. That's a bad squirrel. I mean, maybe they piss us off. We do, but like, you don't say that's a good tree and that's a bad tree. It's a tree, right? Same with humans. We're being a human. That's what we're doing, right? And we can do bad things. We can do, maybe bad isn't even the word. Like maybe just pull out good and bad, right? We can do harmful things. We can do things that aren't aligned with our values. We can do things that harm other people and ourselves. And I would like us to move away from that. But it's not about trying to be good or bad. It's trying to be you. It's trying to be a human. It's trying to show up and honor, I think Eisenstein would say, like, honor the gifts, that the natural gifts we've been given, by practicing them, by showing up, by being there, by being our messy selves. And so there was a huge relief there, and also like a realization that like my risks also need to be aligned with my values and what I learn. And so there are some places where I probably could stand to take more risk. For example, the amount of money I keep in savings is probably higher than it needs to be. I'm probably trying to control the future a little bit through planning, rather than keeping the money in flow. But at the same time, I no longer think that I shouldn't be earning money, because I realize that as much as, I wouldn't like it to be this way, I do have opportunities other people don't have because of my privilege. And as much as I would prefer that we, give equitably and people earn equitably, that's not true. And so redistribution is the way of addressing that. And so giving more generously, but also like giving in connection, like not just giving anonymously to Black organizations, but like Native organizations, but showing up at community events, giving, helping individuals out and getting to know them. All of these things I think are like challenging and things that I'm probably going to be doing slowly, but realizing that like the change of the Patreon model, it feels like a risk, but it feels like an aligned risk. It feels like a good risk. It feels like it's bringing myself more in alignment with my values. And so, I'm going to be showing up more in my sort of messy personal self. I'm going to be telling more stories, because I am like at heart a storyteller. I don't do that very much. I mean, even in this video, I can hear myself sort of trying to summarize things or trying to like tell the lesson. And I'm trying to get out of that a little, because I do feel like rather than like commenting on my experience, I think that if you're a creator who does storytelling, I think one of the things that's good storytellers is like they tell the details and the specifics of the story in a way that helps you to resonate. And so you don't need them to tell you the moral of the story necessarily. Maybe at the end, but like, so I'm trying to trust that more. Because what people told me when I left my job, and like what people have told me consistently, people who say good things about me, it's almost always like, and this comes back to too muchness. So many people told me when I was leaving my job, like, the thing that people are gonna support or buy into or want to engage with is you. It's not tarot, and it's not astrology. It's not even spirituality or personal growth necessarily. It's your voice. It's you as a human being, Avery. And so you as the human being, your name here, like that is what people show up for. And even if they don't, realizing that like the more authentic and the more you are, the better you're able to connect. The people who need that. Because the people who need something else, they can go connect with somebody else. The people who, don't approve of me, like that's fine. I'm okay with that. Because it's not about virtue. Because somebody not approving of me doesn't mean I'm bad. And I think that is the big like shift. And so I'm going to trust the people who say that it's more about me than it's about stuff. And I'm just going to like share things from as myself. Be the most self I can be. Keep checking in on whether I'm coming back to the center of myself, as I talked about in the last video. That's what I'm going to do. So here we are at the end. I'm going to give you 10 things I've learned plus a bonus. 10 things I've learned. So if you just jumped to this timestamp, haven't heard the rest of the story, I'm going to go ahead and tell you, and then if you want to watch the story later, you can. Okay, 10 things I've learned. Sorry, my voice is not great, but hopefully you can understand it. Hopefully the captioning picks it up anyway. If you don't know this, I have auditory processing disorder, so I can't self-caption, so hoping the auto is okay. Okay, 10 things I've learned. Here we go. Number 1. You don't have to do things one way. You don't have to listen to what the platform tells you. You don't have to, if you're on YouTube, I'm not editing this. This is one take. Yeah, most people on YouTube edit. I'm not gonna. And maybe that means that there's fewer followers. I'm okay with that, right? So you don't have to do things one way. Good content doesn't have to be super painful and thought out and well done. Like, authenticity matters. Editing and stuff is good. Like, if you like it, if you enjoy it, if it, brings you joy, brings you purpose, if it, if you love the way it makes your stuff turn out, then awesome. But, like, not everybody has to do that. Number 2, predicting what people want almost never works. So if you cater to what other people want, or more, if you cater to what you think they want, which is the challenge of people pleasing, is like and especially if you're neurodivergent like me, what you think people want may not be what they want. So stop trying, because if you cater to what you think they want, you are limiting the audience that you want finding you. You're limiting the people who actually don't want the thing you think they want and actually want the real you. And it's not a binary, right? The real you. But the more authentic you are, the more people who need you, personally you, how you are, will show up. And that's what we want. That's what we want, is to connect offers and needs. People who need you to show up to what you're offering. 3, not getting views, not getting followers doesn't mean your content is bad. And this was really helpful for me to understand. I have a lot of comparison feelings, and realizing that, like, a big follower count may just mean you have a lot of bots. It also may mean if you do things to get followers, sometimes they come for that thing, but, like, they're not very well aligned to you. So your follow rate could be great. No shade to people who have a lot of followers, but, like, what you're really wanting to do is build it at the pace of what you have to offer. And that might be fast, that might be slow, that might be big, that might be small. And there's still a little secret voice right in the back of my head that's like, ooh, if I'm really authentic, will lots of people show up? But I'm not going to focus on that. You can be creative with your model too. Like, people don't have to follow you to, like, buy your offering or to engage with you. I've spent, like, a good amount of money on an offer for somebody that I now see once or twice a week within the offer that I don't follow on anything at all. So, thinking bigger than followers. Okay, number 4, trying to take yourself out of the equation and make things just about knowledge and just about facts does not make people hype. It just doesn't. I learned that. 5, energy spent usually doesn't line up with the response to the thing that you created, and that's okay. What matters is the quality of the energy. So if you're like me with, like, the 10 people watching on YouTube for a year or 2, and you're putting out content twice a week, and you love it, and you're processing through it, and you're learning, and it's great, and you're joyful, and you have capacity to do it, which is important. But, like, when you're in that flow, often you don't even think about capacity, like, which can be bad, but, like, I think what I more mean to say is when you're in flow, you have more capacity, you have more energy. And so focusing on that, because the thing that becomes the most popular is probably not the thing you like the most, the thing you're most proud of. It's just not. It's annoying sometimes when you, like, I've written things I'm so proud of, and I'm like, yes, this idea is going to change the world, and 5 people saw it. Well, shit. But that's okay. It's okay. 6. If I am here to serve, then I have to trust that I can do that. And that the people who need me will find it. For a long time I felt frustrated because I felt like I had so much high quality stuff to offer and the people just couldn't find it. It takes a lot of trust, radical trust in yourself, in the universe, whatever. And you gotta do it. There's no shortcut. Number 7. When you start saying, so-and-so is of value for me, but it's a bad sign. So when you say, yeah, I mean, values-wise, I think a flat tier Patreon would be better, but, like, nobody's going to show up, so I'm going to do it different. When you say, I know that showing up and being authentic is a value for me, but I'm scared, so I'm going to run away. It's just a little sign. Little sign. Check in with your internal compass. 8. Going to extremes and self-effacing and trying to erase and destroy yourself is what capitalism wants. And it's about trying to win, and nobody wins. It's not a competition. It's an existence. I'm going to say that again. It's not a competition. It's an existence. It's presence. Liminality, experiencing discomfort, staying present, spiralic living, that's who I am, not competition. Perfectionism and effacing myself, they're trauma responses. They involve a lot of personal and collective trauma, and they're part of my attachment wounding, and I can work on that. But I shouldn't lean into them. I said shouldn't. I don't like shouldn't. I'm going to try not to. Number 9. I and you deserve love and deserve belonging unconditionally, inherently. You don't have to do anything specific to deserve love, to deserve presence here on this earth, to deserve belonging. You may be frustrated with how much love is expressed and how much you feel you belong, but that doesn't mean you need to try harder. And 10. If you focus on the first few people who show up for something, your energy is going to get drained away from the experimentation that could bring in way more people and aligned people. So sometimes the first few people who show up, they might be. Like, if you showed up first to me, thank you. You're awesome. But you don't need to, like, measure everything or make decisions entirely based on, like, the first client you have, the first 10 clients you have. The benefit and the beauty of working with those first few people is that it teaches you a lot about yourself and it helps you to pivot, and that's huge. And they might stay with you. A lot of times they do. And they might not. Either way is good. And finally, a bonus, I guess number 11, but I'm calling it the bonus, is that earning money is not in itself evil. Money is meant to flow. And disappearing and hiding away and leaving and trying to minimize yourself, it doesn't actually bring anyone else resources. And I think that's really important. Harm reduction, important, yes, but resources don't magically show up because you step off the stage. Someone else doesn't get magically invited because you step off the stage. Redistribution does, though. Redistribution, both in the monetary sense, but also things like accepting the invitation, but then saying, I'm only going to show up if you invite 2 other folks of color who have expertise in this topic, and here's a list. Please invite and pay them, right? Being engaged, being involved. And sometimes you step away, and sometimes the opportunity isn't right, but redistribution. Like, I'm going to have opportunities that other people aren't, and while it is problematic that I'm the one who gets to redistribute some of that wealth, it's better to let it flow than to just keep things stagnant. So that's it. That's the video. I hope you enjoyed. Just as a reminder, I would love it, love it, love it if you subscribe to my newsletter. That's where you're going to get a lot of good stuff, long-form content, options to decide which list you're on, tarot, astrology, spiritual development, personal growth. So do the thing. I'd also love it, love it, love it if you shared this channel, newsletter, whatever you want to share. I'll leave links below as usual, so it's got all my places you can find me online. Please share. Please bring more people in. I need help. I'm asking for what I need. I need help. I don't know how to find all the people and bring all the people in who would resonate with my work. So if you think of someone, just send them a little link. Do the thing. And finally, if you get value from my content and are able to, I'd love it if you support me. Patreon.com/queermagical is the best way to do so. You can make donations as little as $1 a month. You can leave anytime. There's no obligation. and you are supporting this free content, both for yourself and for others who can't afford it. So if you're able, if you'd like to, do it. If you're not, leave with a light heart and keep enjoying the free content. I love providing it for you. All right, my sparkly beans, that's all for today.